and welcome to Witchcraft and Voodoo. I'm Sable Aradia, Wiccan Priestess, and I'm here with my friend Lilith Dorsey, Voodoo Priestess. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
And tonight our topic is ethics. So this is an interesting, I really like this topic, and I'm not even sure where to start. I know that wherever I start, we're going to end up somewhere else. So I guess I'll start with the concept of the Wiccan read, which that's not the only thing though. See, this is something that people have talked about before. There's a belief that the only ethic in Wicca is the Wiccan read. I would say it's the only rule, but there are other ethics, and I will talk about those as well once Lilith has had a chance to address the topic. So, starting with the Wiccan read. Okay, you may have heard of it, right? And it's some variation of "an it harm none, do what thou wilt." So, this seems like a really uncomplicated thing, but it's not. I did a whole article on this at one point. You can find it on my Patheos blog. It's called Witches Don't Whine. And
I like that.
Thank you. It's okay, so let's break it down a bit, right? "And it harm none." It's just a archaic way of saying as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. And that's because witches just like stuff that sounds archaic. There's no other reason for that, right? So as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, do whatever you want. Okay, so on one hand, this is very permissive, and a lot of people tend to treat it as being very permissive. It says, well, go ahead and do whatever you want. Okay, no, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, do whatever you want. Okay, so apparently we had a break in the internet, so I'm trying to pick up where I left off, and I don't know where exactly that was. So forgive me if I'm going over a topic we've already covered. But let's, I'll go back to, when I was in my teens, I found the idea of the Wiccan read very liberating. I started going through everything in my life and, you know, everything that I thought I'm supposed to do or I'm not supposed to do. And if I couldn't think of a reason why, right, like I asked the question, why am I not supposed to do this? Why am I supposed to do this? If I couldn't think of a reason, gone, right? So for this reason, Wicca tends to be very permissive in a lot of areas where the overculture has issues. For instance, any form of sexual preference is perfectly fine. If you're not hurting anybody, who cares, right? Polyamory is fine, right? If you want to be ethically promiscuous, that's fine. If you don't want to have sex ever with anybody, that's fine, right? You know, whatever your personal kink is fine, because as long as you're practicing it ethically, everything's done with consent. You're not, you know, breaking up a relationship or doing other harmful activities with what you're doing. Go for it. And every witch addresses these things personally. Background noise, this is great. I find that for myself, I have, I won't get involved in relationships with people or even, you know, friends with benefits, which I do, right? I do that, right? I'm not monogamous in my polyamorous relationship, right? I won't get involved with somebody who's involved with somebody else as long as I know that, you know, if I don't know for absolute certain that other person who I'm not getting involved with is cool, right? If they're not cool with it, then, you know, I want nothing to do with it. But I know that there are some who believe, as you know, what people don't know, don't hurt them. I don't approve of that, but that's not my decision, right? Every witch has to make their own decision about what they consider to be ethical. take hexing, right? Hexing is another thing. Some people believe you should never, ever, ever hex anybody ever, period. Others believe that it depends on why and what the hex is, and, is the greater good served, right? Like, if you've got somebody who's in an abusive relationship and they're trying to get out, but this person's stalking them, right? Is it okay to, do a hex where they're likely to get caught by the cops? Or, is it okay to do something where if you're, like it won't activate unless you're doing something that's a direct attack, right? Like it's a reactive hex, right? So every witch has to address that personally. And that's the other half of the equation, which is, as long as it harms none, right? So what do you do if it does harm somebody? There's lots of things in life where you can't avoid causing some kind of harm. If you're a meat eater in our culture, you are hurting animals. You are, right? What we do to our domestic animals in our factory-based farming model is horrifying. And if you know anything about it, right, if you're participating in that. I'm not arguing vegetarianism. I'm not a vegetarian. I am an omnivore. I tried vegetarianism. I lasted 3 days, and then I grabbed my husband by the collar and said, "Get me a fucking hamburger right now." So, because my health is not very good if I don't have, a certain amount of meat protein in my diet. For whatever reason, I'm prone to anemia. That's probably why. But I try to find better ways to do that because I'm aware that I'm participating in this horrible thing, right? So I'll eat game meat whenever I can because at least I know they were ethically killed. I'll eat halal when I can because it's a less, it's less traumatic for the animals. I will eat only free-range eggs, stuff like that. And again, it's a matter of personal decision. So I think I've babbled long enough about that. Where are you at?
Well, I mean, I think obviously the sex issue doesn't come into it as much with us because we sort of keep that aspect of our lives separate, which is again against what the media would say, what the conceptions of, popular opinion of what you do. I had somebody show up at one of my rituals once and they started to have sex and they're like, "Isn't this what you do at a voodoo ritual?" And I said, "No, this is not what happens at a voodoo ritual. This is disrespectful, and I'm glad you're having a good time, but this is not the place to be doing that, So so the sex part doesn't come into it in the same way. There are, I mentioned when we were talking about the ancestors in that episode that we did, that some of our, Loa are very lusty. The Barons and the Gede, they tend to have very lusty behavior, and they might grab. It's talk about consent culture. They don't have very much consent ideology behind what they're doing. So if you enter that space, you realize that it's going to come with people doing lusty gestures and probably using swear words and all of those kinds of things. But that's pretty much anybody, they know that before they enter that space and walking in there, Where we do get it is all of this stuff about hexes and things like that, because I think people have this notions about voodoo being very dark magic or black magic, not just magic done by black people like me, magic that really has a negative connotation to it. And I think the reason it gets this is because it's a system that was developed by people that were enslaved, people that are oppressed, people that are still marginalized and struggling. And, if somebody's raping your wife and beating your child and making them work in the fields and selling them off down the river, and, you might want to do a spell that was going to stop them or freeze them in their tracks or make them not wake up again the next day or whatever, And it's funny, in the introduction to my book, the introduction, my friend says that he opened up the refrigerator at work and there was an apple with all different colored toothpicks stuck in it. And he asked his boss, "What's this?" And the woman said, "That's Mr. Johnson." And the next day, Mr. Johnson had a heart attack. Well, I guess Mr. Johnson was a bastard. So,
Right.
There we go again about what's our response. If somebody's being abusive to you, if somebody's being hurtful to you, what I always like to question people is, if somebody came up and punched you in the face, or as unfortunately I have witnessed, somebody punched my daughter in the face, how would you respond? You know, would you respond with violence, or would you sit there and, you know, kumbaya it out? And as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to be the kumbaya it out type of person, because that doesn't really work for me. That's just the short answer for that. You know, I'm going to defend myself however I can in those tricky situations. And of course, if I was, you know, in slavery in, you know, 1800s America, I certainly would have defended myself any way I could. So, but what you get is a magical system that, you know, if you have a spell that's going to stop Massa from raping you, that spell is going to be really popular. So that spell is going to get passed on. The spell about, you know, whatever, this is how to make the extra good ancestral thing from back in the homeland, unfortunately, that's going to get lost by the wayside more often, because it doesn't have more of a direct use for those people who are in a life and death situation all the time. Now, and again, like I said, I've been in life and death situations, and I would defend myself in that situation. So for me, defending myself magically is no different than trying to defend myself physically. You know, sometimes it's easier to defend yourself physically, but sometimes you're in a situation where that's just not possible. You know, so yes, I advocate people go get legal help. I advocate people also get, you know, physical protection for themselves if they can. But then if they need to do that type of spell, I'm not going to judge them ethically about it one way or another. You know, I'm going to try and see if there are alternatives first, because that might be easier or safer for the actual person who's coming to me for help. But I'm not going to say, no, we can't do that because it's a dark spell, or it's a hex, or it's a negative spell, or it's a curse, or something like that. I mean, again, I've mentioned before, but I've got Scottish ancestry as well. We're all about the curses, you know, so they go on for generations and generations. And I think to deny that such a thing exists really is folly, you know. And I got a lot of flack when I did my love magic book, because to me, the other side of this, and I wonder what you think about this, Sable, is this whole realm of spell work that goes with commanding or controlling or compelling, which in a way I also feel is really quite unethical, but also necessary sometimes. You know, as you mentioned, if somebody has a stalker, I've had stalkers, you know, and, you know, you need to get them focused on something else. And sometimes that's the only way.
Well, you know, I'm on your page, right? And this is something that, again, I've gotten flack for it too, right? It's controversial among the Wiccan community in particular and the pagan community in general. There's a lot of people who have taken up the practice of what they call traditional witchcraft, which is non-Wiccan witchcraft that comes from there's an idea that it's unchanged, and it's been going on for forever. Oh no, the Wicca, you know, Wicca wasn't really this unchanged tradition. This stuff is. That's utter nonsense. Traditional witchcraft comes from things like the tribe of Tubal-Cain, which developed simultaneously with Gardener's Coven. It's exactly as old. It was just a rival group that had a different opinion. So sorry, I hate to burst your bubble, but that's the way it is. Right? So, but okay, fair enough, right? And one of the reasons why they do that is because the way that a lot of beginners Wicca books have been written presents the read like this straitjacket of never hurt anybody ever, which is nonsense. If you walk on the grass, you have hurt bugs and plants and bacteria, right? And that is the way of the world, right? So it's a matter of what is the least harm, right? And you are just as important in that equation, in my opinion, as anybody else. So I'm a believer in protective hexes, and I'm a believer in retributive hexes when they're necessary. I have done them, and I'll do them again, and I'm not going to apologize for that. There's been a couple of occasions where I happen to know that, you know, there has actually been harm that has been brought to somebody, but the harm they were going to do to somebody else, in my opinion, it's just like, okay, like you said, right? If somebody comes up to you and they punch you in the face, I'm not going to stand there and go, don't do that. I'm going to punch you back. You know, forget it. So yeah, I'm with you. As to the manipulative aspect in love magic, now I don't know, because I haven't read your book yet. I've you know, but okay, yeah, if you got a stalker, right? Yeah, you gotta, you know, you've got two things you can do with this guy, right? Or girl, depending, right? And that is, you can drive them off, or you can cause them harm. The law often will not help you in this department because it's very difficult. I mean, like, stalking laws are getting better, but they're still way behind the times. There's lots of areas where there's almost no protection because it's difficult to prove criminal action, right? And proving criminal action is much more difficult than proving the possibility of it. So
Yes.
yeah, you got to defend yourself, right? So you can either hurt the guy or you can drive him off by getting him focused on something else. Okay, honestly, what's worse, right? Like, and again, I don't judge that because that's your decision, right? If you believe that the greater good is served by taking this guy out of the gene pool, maybe it is, But I personally would generally rather try directing them somewhere else first, because violence is something that I'm willing to deliver, but as a last resort, right? So, but like you say, someone comes up to me and punches me in the face, we're at the last resort. I'm not going to just let somebody do that. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I don't know, I sort of had a mini epiphany, and I'll say this because you're Canadian, about, moving people along. For the longest time, I would do things to move people along to Canada. And then I did my first event in Canada, and they told me they were moving people along to the States. So I thought, okay, so we're just recycling.
Yeah, what good are we doing here? Yeah, exactly. You're just making it somebody else's problem, aren't you? You're refusing to take responsibility for dealing with it yourself. You're passing the buck. I don't think that's cool either. It's one of the things I did touch on in my article, is that the read does it makes you take responsibility, right? That's the point. Okay, it's not somebody else's problem, it's your problem, right? What are you going to do, right? If you make this somebody else's problem, what, do you want that? Right? So yeah, witchcraft does have a countercultural element of oppressed peoples too. One of the formative books of modern Wicca was called Aradia, Gospel of the Witches. You may have noticed this sounds familiar. He was a guy named Charles Leland was purportedly, and there's dispute, scholars argue about this, but there are people who do practice in this tradition, which he claims to have been documenting. Right? There is a tradition of Italian witchcraft called the strega or stregera, right? And it's very much about, poor people trying to protect themselves and, maybe get something back from this, oppressive landlord class that owned everything and they had nothing, right? So there's all kinds of stuff in there. Aradia is... she's supposedly the daughter of Diana, goddess of the moon, and Lucifer as seen like the bringer of light, right? So, some people, again, try to divorce themselves from that because they're like, Lucifer, right? But I don't know, that's a whole different conversation. I wrote an article about that too. I'm not going to get into it. But Diana was sent to the world to teach witchcraft to the masses and liberate the oppressed. That was her job, right? So she teaches how to hex as well as how to heal. And there's all kinds of little details about some charms to do that in that book, right? And it's one of the reasons why I took her name as part of my name when I initiated to my 3rd degree. It wasn't, I wouldn't presume to take her name per se. That's why it's Sable Aradia. Right, but it's Diana that I feel reached out to me first in her aspect as Queen of the Witches and Protectress, right? And this is part of the job that I think that I've been asked to do, right? You develop connections with deities who have agendas that coincide with yours. They reach out to you because you're doing things which they approve of, right? And that's what I think she's asked me to do, is teach witchcraft to the masses and liberate the oppressed. This is what I do. Right?
That's great. I love that. No, I mean, I think you touched on a lot of really interesting points there, you know, and I just want to say I'm not running around doing commanding, compelling, and controlling spells and things like that. And you know, that was a point I made when I did do the Love Magic book. That's not something I agree about doing. But yes, you know, in the same circumstances that we're talking about, there might have to be alternative things that might, under other circumstances, would be ethically questionable. You know, if nobody's done anything to you, then doing something to stop somebody in their tracks or to make them lose their job or to make them be a little foggy brained, all of those things, you know, is not something that you would do if somebody hadn't done something to you. But if you're trying to protect yourself and you don't have any other means at hand, then I really don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's very different to me than something that I think would be unethical. It's like trying to control my lover. You know, I've told everybody the story about trying to control somebody and then, you know, you end up together and you both die of AIDS, or trying to control somebody and the person's really not well in the brain and you end up getting abused by them, or a million other things that could happen. But, you know, I think that, you know, if you're trying to focus your spells, and somebody told me they thought love spells in general were manipulative. And honestly, I think all spells in general are manipulative. I mean, you're trying to change something to make it different from the way it is. Because if you were happy with it the way it was, you wouldn't be bothering to get the candle or the oil or to do the ritual or to consult the psychic or any of that, you know. So on that level, we're all being manipulative. But again, if you're doing a love spell, I would recommend doing something to bring the best love for you. If you're trying to combat somebody you think is evil and you're having a problem with them, then do a spell to get the best solution for you, to have the clarity for that, to have the means to be able to carry out that solution. You know, we don't necessarily have to turn to these things, and that's where I think the real ethics comes in. You know, you mentioned before about, which, and I know there was a big hubbub online about a month ago about, you know, Wiccans and animal sacrifice, you know, and I've mentioned before, I know a lot of Wiccans who are, you know, been in it since the beginning, you know, Friends of Gardner and all of that, who have had animal sacrifice as part of their practice. That's just, you know, the way it is. And if you look at the Catholic Church, they had animal sacrifice as part of their practice, you know. So and it is done much more humanely than the kinds of things you're talking about, factory farm chickens and stuff like that. And I was vegetarian too for over a year, but then again, I had health problems when I was pregnant, so I had to go back to eating meat. So, yeah, and I definitely feel for all of that, and I try and have as most, you know, I buy cage-free, you know, meat whenever I can and everything like that. And that's, you know, for me, the same thing as killing something respectfully. You know, other people are killing it, and we don't do it willy-nilly. It's not like you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I'm going to have a chicken to sacrifice today. It's more like, okay, well, I need this to protect myself. I need this to heal myself, or I need to protect or heal a loved one. And after all the other options, this is what came up as necessary in the situation. And that's how we move forward.
I'm not opposed at all to animal sacrifice. You know, I realize, again, that's a contradiction or a controversy. A lot of, I don't know, maybe I'm old and cynical, but
that's okay.
I mean, no, seriously, like what difference does it make? How is this different than, you know, we're going to eat the animal, right? How is this different from we're going to kill a bunch of cows and make leather stuff, you know? How is this different from, you know, oh, even I'm hungry and I've grown a garden and now I've pulled the carrots out, you know? You killed the carrots, didn't you? They're dead, you know?
Yeah. Well, I always say to people, what if it was an animal-derived medicine that you needed to save your life? Because for me, it's the same thing. I need this animal to save my life in this way. The same way that if a doctor said, you got to take these little pills or you're going to die. Well, I don't know where they came from. They might have an animal component to them that the animal had to suffer. I don't know. But I would probably still take it anyway, you know, because I want to live. Sorry.
Yeah, I get that, you know. I mean, that's part of the take responsibility, right? And you're just as important as everybody else in terms of what is the greater good there, right? Now, the organization that I'm part of, the Congregationalist Wiccan Association, has a list of ethics that you have to sign when you join them. One of them says that you don't practice animal sacrifice. So I don't practice it myself, right? I'm planning, I've been doing some soul searching, and I'm probably not going to stay with them for the time, you know, for moving forward, but doesn't mean I'm going to go out and practice animal sacrifice immediately either. I would have to have a need, right? But I'm not opposed to it. And I, like I said, I prefer to eat halal, which is a form of animal sacrifice, or has been described as that, right? Because there's a certain ritual involved in the killing of the animal, right? And I think people are just superstitious about it. I don't think they've bothered to educate themselves as to what goes on there and why it's done. And the idea is to cause as little pain, harm, and trauma to the animal as possible, right? So they, you know, make sure it's a clean cut to the jugular, and they make sure that the animal is, you know, off the ground, so they're not like scrabbling around. And, you know, I mean, when you compare this to marching cows up a treadmill, right, and sticking them in the head with a, you know, pointy thing that goes whack and comes down, you know, I mean, come on, which is more ethical here, right? So, you know, and we've survived as a species for a long time because we're at least in part predators. You know, we have the youth. You know, they're pointy. They're there for a reason, right? So, and you know, I don't think I think it's a matter of attitude, right? Like if you're gonna go and you know, poach a bunch of stuff, right? Say, you know, like these guys who were killing white rhinos. And, you know, taking their horns and abandoning the bodies. What the hell is the matter with you, you know? And you're taking these and you're selling them to people, and what you're doing there is you're getting rich on, you know, the destruction of another species. This is not okay, in my opinion, right? So, on the other hand, you know what? If I've had friends who've been really poor, and they've gone out into the Canadian woods off season and killed themselves a deer, and they ate it, and their family survived. And you know, you'll never get me to tell who those people are. That's totally up to them. They had to eat, and they ate, and that is, you know, I don't have any issue with that. So. Yeah, again, it comes down to that, but these are my personal, you know, based on my interpretation of, okay, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, it's fine, right? So I really don't see what taking one deer from the middle of the Canadian wilderness, you know, is going to hurt anybody in the middle of summer, right? As long as they're not firing off firearms near town, you know, it hurts one deer, right? But maybe it feeds an entire family for a month. So, meh, okay, yeah, technically it's illegal, but not every law is just. Often the power structure is corrupt, or just unjust, or so bureaucratic that the human factor gets lost. I mean, you know, here's another example, right? The treatment of animals, right? Your pets, right? Until recently, pets were property, right? So if somebody murdered your dog, you know, they broke your window. It's not the same thing. They murdered your dog. They're horrible, right? My dog is part of my family. You would not like the response if you brought harm to my dog. I guarantee you I'd be up on charges for something, right? So, you know, and I think that's fine, you know, like, because, you know, you hurt my dog, he's my friend, you know. Yeah. So, you know, but the law is not always fair, right?
No.
I'm not advocating go out and, you know, break laws willy-nilly, by the way, just in case, you know, the legal disclaimer here is don't break the law. You will get in trouble, you know. That's your responsibility, but that's part of it. You accept that responsibility.
Of course. No, I mean, and I think people's objection, I think most people's objection comes from, you know, they don't really think what we're doing works. So if you start out with, you know, we're just doing it for the show or to be silly or, you know, for whatever they think we're doing it for. I don't know why. It certainly takes a lot of effort if we're not really doing anything. But I think they don't believe it's genuine, you know, and I mean, I had a fiance his neighbor shot his dog while he was out of town. Like, nobody cared. You know, you're right. Like, it happens. It happens all the time. And people didn't care when we say that, but these same people will turn around and get shocked and upset if they hear about a Santeria ritual or something like that where animals are being sacrificed, you know. And I mean, we don't do it personally in my house. I'll say that, because nobody's going to come over here and see me do that in my living room or anything like that. But I have been in a lot of ceremonies where it has been done, and a lot of the people I work with do that on a regular basis, you know, again, for important things. And I think that we really need to think about, you know, if you're so gung-ho advocate for animals, yay, I think that's wonderful. We'll go out and advocate for animals. This is not where I think the best place your efforts should be concentrated, because we're not killing, you know, as many animals as the major meat industry is, and you know, we're killing them much more humanely and much less, you know.
Can't argue. Got nothing to say about that, because I'm totally on your page there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. What are the other ethical issues people have a problem with?
Ethical issues. Well, I don't know.
Nudity.
Are we talking about nudity? Yeah. Hey, that's a good one. Let's go ahead. Yeah. Let's talk about nudity.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't that much of a one for us, because we, you know, we usually aren't nude in our rituals. You know, we'll wear ritual whites or something like that. There is something that I've noticed, and I've noticed it with other practitioners as well, that it's hard to keep your clothes on, but we have to try. So that's all I have to say about that.
Fair enough. Yeah, many traditions in Wicca, especially the hardcore British traditional derived ones, practice skyclad, which is to say ritual nudity. Depending, my own tradition will use it, but in limited doses, because we find that our culture is so weird about it, right? For me, nudity is one of those things that's on the list of there's no good reason to have issues about it, so get over it. I raised my kids to not care. They don't, you know, so I've had problems with that at one point, you know, but I've had problems with authorities because of my religion before. Somebody called child services on me at one point because they found out I was a witch, right? And, you know, those guys were a nightmare in the 90s, right? This was in the middle of the satanic panic, and it was hell, right?
Oh,
but
terrible.
You know, and that was one of the things they, you know, they were like, oh, well, you know, it's inappropriate to be nude around your kids. And I'm like, why? You know, why? Because your Christian morality says that's inappropriate. I'm not a Christian. Is there any law against it? No, right? So what business is it of yours? You know, and it's not like, you know, I just like, I'd go to from the bathroom to the bedroom and get gets clothes, right? You know, that was, you know, that's my level, right? So, okay, so there's my attitude about it, right? Now, from the theological perspective, the reason to practice skyclad is the idea that we're all equals under the divine, right? So when you're naked, you have no, you know, there's no trappings of rank or wealth or class, right? You're not divided by nationality, you know, you're not, putting on airs for each other, right? Because everybody's got something about their body that they wishes they didn't, right? So it's very hard to be arrogant when you're naked, right? And that's the point of that. That and the idea that we're born naked, right? We return to the earth, right? So this is what we came with, right? We didn't come with jewels and cloth, right? So why would we be before the gods with jewels and cloth, you know? So we tend to use it primarily for initiation ceremonies in my tradition, right? If we're just doing general ritual, we don't tend to. We tend to go for ritual robes as well. But obviously, I believe in it, and I believe there's a point to it, which is why I still, you know, why our tradition still does it in initiation rituals, right? So, yeah.
All right. You just reminded me of something that I don't know if this fits into ethics. I think it probably does, but we do have a thing in Lukumi about, you know, certain people are unclean. So if you are a menstruating woman, you're unclean, and therefore you don't have the same, like you shouldn't touch the ritual items or touch the feast food or something like that. And it's basically that time is seen as a sort of, you know, inward focusing time for women. They're not supposed to be concentrated on doing a ritual for the community or helping with this initiation. They're only supposed to be focused on themselves. So that's why their stuff is, you know, segregated at that point. And the same deal with, you know, and when they're done menstruating, they have to have a shower just with running water, has to go over their body in order to sort of make them clean again and able to be a participant.
Fair enough. I mean, like, you know, there's been taboos like that. I don't know, I think maybe taboo is the wrong word, but, you know, there's been ritual practice like that in a variety of cultures. It used to be a thing where in a lot of cultures, if men went off to war, right, they would have to be ritually cleansed before they could come back and be with society because, you know, it's a different matter, right? And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that because, you know, war is it's its own thing. Horrible things happen. Rules of society, like, you know, you can't just shoot people or whatever, are suspended, right? And one of the things that we have trouble with in our society is our warriors coming home, right? And then trying to adapt to this world where they've been under fire and all this stuff. And now they've, you know, got to go get the groceries. And, you know, some people have trouble with it. And that's part of our post-traumatic stress disorder issue, right? I think it applies in other situations too. But, you know, like if there was a defined ritual or rite of passage that we would do, I think it would be a lot easier. I know that the armed forces that have a really delineated process of mustering out tend to do a lot better than those who don't. And I think that that could be one of the reasons why. So yeah, ritual cleansing, you know, and, you know, when is it not, you know, yeah, other than ritual bathing is something that is supposed to be, the earlier Wiccans did it, period. You know, they would ritually bathe and they would either come sky-clad into the circle or they would, you know, if their tradition had robes, they would robe up and come into the circle right after the ritual bath. Often we don't do this these days because we're having our ritual at, you know, 7 o'clock at night after people have done dinner when they just got home from work. And, you know, but I think there's a lot to be said for it. And I think it's a good practice in any ritual to do some form of cleansing before you enter the space. So, you know, anoint people or, you know, asperge them in the area, right? Whatever it is, you know, an incense cleansing, something, right? Something to delineate the space from the mundane world and the ritual space.
We should do an episode on cleansing.
You know what? Okay, yeah, I was just thinking we should totally put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if you want to talk about, this was, okay, why I got thinking of this, right? You said ethics, okay? So I've got a prop today, right? Here's my prop, right? This is a book called The Other Side of Virtue by a Canadian pagan writer, Dr. Brendan Myers, who is a professor of philosophy, but he's also a well-respected Druid writer, so you may have heard of him through that, right? He didn't believe the reed was enough, right? So he was like, well, what goes beyond the reed, right? And for him, he found that there was a lot of unspoken ethical and moral codes of behavior that are intrinsic in paganism in general. And I advise people to read his book. I thought it was excellent. But it got me thinking, right? Okay, so for Wiccans, there's also the charge of the goddess, right? And this is something, it's our only piece of consistent liturgy that is used by pretty much every tradition and every solitary practitioner that there is. It's the only thing that we all share. There are different versions of it, where in one, some lines are changed. Starhawks tends to be more poetic, so it's probably more commonly used. I like to use Starhawk's version with the stuff that was omitted from Doreen Valiente's version brought back in myself, because I think they're important, you know, stuff like, therefore, where is it here? You see, now I'm drawing a blank because I'm trying really hard to think of it, but it had something about let yourself be enfolded in the rapture of the infinite, right? And you know, it's a beautiful line, and it's important. Okay, so I wrote an article again, right, on the Wiccan, the charge of the goddess, and the Wiccan ethic that it implies, right? And it was in Witches and Pagans magazine a couple years ago, and you can also find it online somewhere on my website. But okay, so in the Church of the Goddess, there's lots of things that we end up incorporating as codes of ethics, right? Okay, listen to the words of Great Mother, the who is called Artemis, Astarte, Diana, Melusine, Hecate, Bridget, and by many other names. Different traditions will put in different goddess names, right? Okay, so I don't know. I probably don't want to break it down in all the detail, but I kind of have to go over it to think about aspects. One of those aspects is that everybody's gods are cool, right? And, you know, you may call your goddess Bridget, and somebody else might call their goddess Hecate, and neither one of you are wrong. So that's one thing that's implied by that part of the charge, right? It's, you know, there's a multiplicity of gods and goddesses, and we acknowledge them in different ways, and that's okay. So part of our ethic is respect other people's religion, right? Once in the month, and better it be when the moon is full, you shall assemble in some secret place and adore the spirit of me who is queen of all the wise. So the cycle of the moon is sacred. Usually we gather at the full moon, but we have gathered at other times, right? Depending on purpose. We can get into that some other time, but, right? And the purpose is to honor the goddess, right? You shall be free from slavery, and as a sign that you be free, you shall be naked in your rights. So that's where the sky-clad thing comes from, and also free from slavery. We do not believe in slavery. A witch who is behaving ethically will fight it wherever they see it. And I'm not just talking, for me personally, that extends to wage slavery, you know, kids in Bangladesh, you know, getting paid pennies and chained to machines. It applies to people who are being manipulated into, say, sex work because of a drug addiction, you know, whatever. Wherever there is slavery, you know, that you have to do something against it. You shall be free from slavery, right? You know, and there's more to it, right? I'm not going to break everything down, but because it would take too long. But let there be beauty and strength, power and compassion, honor and humility, mirth and reverence within you. So we value all of those things, right? These are things that we hold dear, right? There's stuff about the other world and a belief in, you know, that we're going to see our loved ones again, right? And we should honor our loved ones. We discussed that in the Ancestors episode, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you who seek to know me, know that your seeking and yearning will avail you not unless you know the mystery. If you do not find that which you seek within yourself, you will never find it without, right? So the answer, you know, that ethic is everybody has their own path to the divine. You have to answer your own questions. So nobody can tell you absolutely this is the way you must do it, right? You can only answer the question for yourself, right? Yeah, so there's strong ethical commands in that liturgy, and we do them, right? You know, I am the beauty of the green earth and the white moon among the stars and the mystery of the waters and the desire of the heart, right? So nature is sacred, the desire of the heart is sacred, you know, the mysteries of things we don't understand are sacred, right? So we should tread lightly on the earth. We should try not to bring harm to anything that we, you know, interact with, right? you know, live a, you know, respect natural cycles, you know, and, you know, there's lots in that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to shut up now because that's long. I would love to hear about similar unspoken, generally undiscussed codes of ethics within your tradition.
Oh, okay. I mean, obviously there's a whole bunch. I mean, I think if we look at Lukumi, you can go through the Patakis, and each one is like a mythological lesson about the Orisha and how they navigate through life, and it shows you a different moral lesson. You know, the one that's coming to mind right now is the tale about Obatala, who was, they call him the king, or there's sort of an androgynous aspect, but that's another thing. But he's always wearing white cloth. She is always wearing white cloth and these beautiful white robes, and, you know, he's ruler over the land, and he goes to visit Shango, his son, and he's taking the journey, and he gets like a spot on his white clothes, and he's like, oh, I'm tired, it's okay, I'll keep going. And then, you know, another mile down the road he gets another spot, and then another mile he gets another spot, and by the time he gets to where his son Shango is, that kingdom, he shows up at the gates and says, I'm the ruler of the white cloth, and they're like, no, you're not, you're a homeless person. And he ends up put into, you know, the dungeon, and it takes a year for him to get out. Some stories say it takes longer than a year, but, you know, there's points to the story that this is supposed to, you know, guard against arrogance. You're supposed to have humility. You're supposed to keep clean. You're not supposed to be lazy, you know, all of these things. And there are, you know, it goes according to, I think I want to say 256. I apologize if they're wrong, but I believe there's 256 different Odu, and each one has a lesson like that, which will teach you different things about that. And we relate to these not only from a personal level, in the sense that every Oshun story, you know, is also about, it's funny, I like to wash my clothes out in the sink because, you know, as you do, and I have a lot of clothes because I'm an Oshun, but there's a story about how she's washing it and she's crying, and that's how her ritual color became yellow, because it was just, they got so tired and cried on from washing them out over and over and over again. So I can relate to the Oshun stories because I'm an Oshun, and that will teach me my ethical and my moral lessons and my guidance. But then I also get them every time I get a reading. That'll come up with another Odu, which will speak to either one or two of these different stories that will tell me how I'm supposed to act and how I'm supposed to proceed. But yes, there's definitely universals about being clean. There's universals about being honest. There's universals about being open-minded. You know, all of those things I think are ethical truths that we live with in all the different traditions that I'm in, you know.
That's fantastic. So basically you're saying there's this, there's these stories, these parables, if you will, that teach you ethical lessons. And part of the process of learning and initiation is learning these stories and grasping the lesson. That's, I
Yes.
love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I remember reading something from Nozaki Shange had done a cookbook, and it was funny. She said she was teaching, we're both writers, so we're both writers here, so you'll appreciate this. She was teaching a kids' writing class, like young kids, like 8 or 9, and she wanted them to write a story about their lives. And they all wrote stories about the Orisha, because for them, they identified so much with the Orisha. They saw their own life through these parables and these stories, even though the experiences had happened to them individually, which I just thought was so beautiful, that they could grow up with that guidance and knowing these stories and knowing how, you know, their direction was going to take.
That is awesome. That, in my opinion, is the function of myth, right? To give us a, cause there's a reason why these stories are universal, right? And it's, and they share similar themes. They have different cultural things that they teach, but there are certain things that are common to the human experience. And I think that that's the purpose of it, right? To give your life kind of a framework, you know, and understand it in the greater concept of human history, and maybe realize, okay, I'm not the only one who's ever gone through this shit, you know, right? Other people understand and have suffered and, you know, have felt this incredible joy and whatever else that you're experiencing, right? That's really beautiful. And I love the fact that it has the ethical teachings interwoven in it. I imagine it's really complex. It's very cool.
It is, and because it was an oral tradition, it's not like there's one book that we can go to that has them all in it. It's all in the telling of it and who tells you and at what time and what you came to get the reading for, or so there's a lot of variation in there. So it's like almost like a flower unfolding, because you discover the complexity and also the deeper level of meaning and truth as you go on and you understand these stories. Even the difference between, when I first heard them, when I first initiated over a decade ago to when I hear them now. It's like they evolve.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
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 I personally think I have babbled long enough.
All right. Yay. Sounds good. All right, everybody.
Yeah, have we decided on what our next episode is going to be on yet? We had a couple of ideas and I've forgotten them both.
No, we did not decide what the next one was going to be. I know we were talking about cooking, maybe. So.
Oh yes,
cooking,
food, yeah. Food and food and magic, food and ritual.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think that would be a good one to do. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Yay. I kind of thought, I should start giving our viewers an idea of what to expect in the next episode.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, and I noticed today that the playlist has ordered itself back into the proper order. You can follow it. It is sequential now. So that is cool.
Yay.
I'm going to try to put links to the next episode somewhere in the video once we've uploaded what the next episode is. Obviously, if this is the most recent episode that you're watching, it will not have that. So, but I'm going to try to do that. And I'm going to also try to transcribe everything, because to be honest, I'm sort of doing two things at once here. One is that I've, as you may have noticed, not been as prolific on my Patheos blog as I should be for quite some time. So this gives me material to write on my Patheos blog. But the other thing is that accessibility is important to me, and I would like these resources to be available somewhere. So this is something that I can do that resolves both purposes. So there will be transcriptions available. I will try to catch up on the ones that we have filmed before that we don't have those for yet, but I can't give you a timetable with that. It will have to be when I have the time.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think that's so wonderful that it'll be accessible to more people. I know people have mentioned that to me, but I apologize. I can't do it. So I'm glad you're doing it.
I tried to close caption. I had this idea that I was going to close caption everything on my channel, right? No, because the automatic closed captioning is so bad.
It's terrible.
I think it completely obscures the meaning that I was intending to convey, and that is not good. So, and it's very time consuming. My little computer takes so long to process everything that it's just not realistic. I have 334 videos on my channel. It's never going to happen. I'm so sorry, but I can do the transcription, and I'm going to do that. From this point on, this will be something I will do for every Witchcraft and Voodoo video and every Sit for a Spell video. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yay. Thanks so much, Lilith. I'm so glad we were able to do this today. I was looking forward to this discussion.
Yay, me too. I'm glad we're doing these again. Yay. I'm glad everybody's watching.
So much. Yes, thank you so much for your support. I see that we've got lots of views on the first one we've put up. It hasn't been that long since we've put episode 9 up, so that's really cool, the episode on ancestors. So thank you all for your support. And again, if there's anything you want us to talk about, let us know.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.